So we are here this morning with Sue Schmidt, who is the Volunteer Services Management on board the Battleship, and she's been here pretty much since day one. And so I guess the first question is, how did you hear about the job in the first place?
Okay, so I'm local, and I had been home raising my kid for the previous 7 years. I was out of work and I needed a job. And I had heard something about the Battleship coming, but I didn't know a whole lot about it. And I literally saw it on the front page of the newspaper. I thought it was kind of too late to get aboard, that it was already a happening thing. I felt like my window had already closed. I saw that in the newspaper and immediately wrote a letter. Got my resume together and I wrote them a letter, and I talked about how I have a background as a mariner, actually licensed, and worked on tall ships for a very long time. And then I also worked as a volunteer coordinator at San Francisco Maritime National Historical Park for quite a few years as well, up in the Bay Area. And so I had this background in volunteer management and maritime. And I actually didn't want the job as the volunteer coordinator. I was figuring that it was going to take a whole team of people to put this all together, that it was just too big. And so I was just trying to be part of the team. And I sent in my resume and I sent in a letter, and I talked to them about how I had that background and that my vision was really about community building, and that that's really the key and the core to running any volunteer program. There's a whole story behind it, but I ended up going up to Richmond to meet with Jonathan to interview. And it was raining, it was freezing cold. I didn't know the first thing about the ship. I mean, it was familiar because it's like, well, it floats, okay, I do that. It's not like a sailboat, but okay, I can deal with this. And he brings me aboard into the officer's wardroom, because it was one of the only places that you could get into the ship. And there was some lights strung overhead, and it was otherwise dark. The regular ship lights were not up and working. You've heard this before, but it's true. There was no water. There were a couple of porta potties. There was no lights. There were no people. There was no money. There was just, it was just a, Mike was sitting on, they were in the volunteer lounge, and Mike was sitting on the couch there, and he's just like, it's like barely moving, they like talk about the walking wounded, these guys. And Jonathan's trying to sell me on the ship, and he's learning a little bit about me. Now, when I went up there, I had a feeling that I might have a good shot at this, just because it's kind of a unique background. And I came prepared. I had my Carhartts, and I had my chop saw, and I had my gloves and my PPE, and I'm like, okay, I heard they're busting deck. I don't know what that is. So I come up, and Jonathan decides to take me on a tour of the ship. And the ship was not the same. It didn't look anything like it looks now. All of the portholes were covered. It was dark. There were no ship lights, and so, headlamps and little flashlights and things like that. And he takes me on this tour, and there were DH barriers, which is dehumidification barriers, that were tack welded on the passageways. So and these hoses, these big air hoses that would go to the dehumidification machines. Now, that's a whole art in and of itself that Mike can tell you about, but it's an important part of why the ship was still in good shape. But you couldn't get, wherever it was, you couldn't get there from here. And so we were like going up and down and over and down these ladders and over here and up there and over. He took me to all these places And he's like telling me about some bathtub, and he's like, all this. It's dark, and he's like, oh yeah, and there's this, and there's this, and there's this, and it's like, I can't see anything. I didn't care. I was like, get me out of here. What's going on? Then he takes me down into the wardroom, opens his computer, and he's like, this is what gets him. And he starts showing me these videos of the Iowa firing her massive guns. And he's like, yeah, and it, this stuff, and I'm watching this and I'm thinking, make it stop. Oh my God. And he turns to me and goes, what do you think? And I'm like, sure, love to. Take the job. If I got the job, yeah, we'll offer you the job. I thought it was like the funniest mismatch in history, and the weird thing about it is that it has worked out so well. I totally fell in love with the ship, fell in love with the people, got to know folks that I wouldn't get to know otherwise, probably. I did, I have this sailing and maritime background, but not at all military. So learning about the military, people, there are so many different people on this crew, and it runs the gamut politically. We are not a political organization, but you've got this wide range of people, different ages, different viewpoints, different backgrounds, and we love each other. And I mean, really, it's not just like, oh, I'm going to act nice because it's my job. No, I mean, we really, really care about each other. It's a family, it's a community, it's a wonderful place. And it's kind of not what I expected. It's sort of the last place I ever expected I'd end up. And here I am having a great time. It's 10 years later. Jonathan told me I was employee number 1, and I just had my 10-year anniversary yesterday. Think of that.